Hello book nerds, welcome to Bookshelf Bunny. I'm Kim, and today we'll be talking about spooky season wrap-up. Starting in September, myself and my fellow book nerd Diamond at A Little Geek, A Little Chic on Bookstagram and Goodreads, we both decided we were going to take the fall months of September and October for a spooky read marathon. This is my original TBR list. I'm going to show you what I've actually managed to read during these last 2 months. You'll notice a lot of them are audiobooks. I am an audiobook reader, listener, reader? What do you call it when you read, not listen, read? I don't know. It's so confusing. I listen to audiobooks, and I tend to do it when I'm working, trying to focus on a task. I have the audiobook in the background, and it just sort of helps keep me on track. I can block out outside distractions. You would think an audiobook would distract me from my work, but for some reason it just doesn't. I also have a lot of hands-on hobbies, things like knitting and sewing and other things that are kind of mindless. So while I'm doing those things, I listen to audiobooks. So I go through a lot of audiobooks. That's why you're going to see so many here. And a lot of them, I get my audiobooks from the library. I borrow them electronically, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the greatest thing the library has ever come up with. Love it. Take a look. This is my completed list of spooky reads. I'm going to show you some of the reads that, at the time of this filming, I'm still looking at. Now, I've got about 2 weeks to go before the end of October. You're going to see it at the end of October, but at the time of filming, I have 2 weeks to go, and these are the books that are still on my radar that I will probably finish. I'm going to talk about my top 5s that I've read so far. I'm not going to include the ones that are still on my radar because it's not really fair. I'm not done them yet. So I'm going to hold off on those ones. But of the books I've completed so far in September and October, the first top 5 favorite is A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That book was so good. If you haven't read it yet, you've got to pick it up. It's got a great sense of humor, and the vampire mythos in it is different, but still feels legitimate. So that's fun. Definitely check that one out. That is my top 5 favorite. Nothing like a middle-aged housewife dealing with vampires to spook up your spooky season. Next on my list of top 5 favorites, Horns by Joe Hill. Now, if you don't know, Joe Hill is actually the son of Stephen King. And this was my first ever Joe Hill book. I have never experienced Joe Hill before now, and let me tell you, Horns was an excellent first exposure. It had such a unique premise, and the character was compelling, and the plot was really dark. It was great. It was gritty. It felt realistic despite the fantastical horror elements. So that is definitely number 2. The third favorite book I read during this spooky season was Revival by Stephen King. Now, Revival, it's sort of slow. It's not an action-packed book, but it's like Stephen King grabbed me by the hair and dragged me slowly but surely to my doom. There's a sense of terror that builds up, and you just know that by the time you reach the climax, you're going to be scared out of your mind. I wasn't scared out of my mind. I'm sort of desensitized, but it was still a great build-up, and it really held my attention. Revival was a great read. Recommend it for sure. Fourth on my list of favorites was Doll Bones. So Doll Bones was an audiobook I listened to. It was kind of short. I think it was about 4, maybe 5 hours, if I remember correctly. And it follows a group of friends who are sort of at that preteen age where they're starting to get interested in other things, but they're still young enough to enjoy playing make-believe together. And one of the items of their make-believe is this doll, this antique doll. And they've deemed her the queen. And this queen is creepy. And the last book of my top 5 favorites of this spooky season was The Mummy, or Ramses the Damned, by Anne Rice. So this isn't your typical mummy monster. This isn't like, mummy. No, this is like posh mummy. So it took a different take on the story type, and I really enjoyed reading it. It kind of took me by surprise. It wasn't what I was expecting when I picked it up. My least favorite book of the books that I read was Twilight. I'm sorry, guys. I know there's a lot of big Twilight fans out there, and maybe it's just because of my age and the time I finally got around to looking at it, but I just couldn't. It wasn't my favorite. It didn't hold my attention. I felt it was really slow. The pacing was off, and for my tastes, Edward wasn't dark enough. I need a dark and twisty vampire to hold my attention, and that just wasn't Edward. I'm so sorry. Also, and this is a problem I've had since the beginning, and probably why it took me so long to get to it, vampires shouldn't sparkle. I just cannot get behind the mythos of this story. I probably won't be following the rest of the series. But I tried. Gave it a solid effort. I'd like to hear from you in the comments. What did you guys read this spooky season? Do you have any recommendations for my next spooky season? Although, let's be real, I read enough horror all year long that I probably will read your suggestions sooner than the spooky season. Yes. Let me know your suggestions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Alright, book nerds, that's it for me. As always, happy reading.